to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as usual, by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Josh.
Thank you.
And Matthew Van Milligan.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Matt.
Thank you.
I went with Matthew today. Yeah,
Very
I thought,
formal.
just to change it up a little bit, right?
Do you feel like you're in trouble?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. When your parents use your full name.
Yes, Father.
Yeah.
Yes, Father. This new phenomenon going on. Maybe it's not new. Maybe it's going on for a while. It's like every time we're in an era of criticism.
Yes.
And every time sort of the Pope says something, or a bishop says something, or a priest says something, or something, people are writing about it online and sort of tearing it apart, and everyone adds their commentary. It's not just a church problem, really.
No.
Remember before the Canadian government banned news on social media?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't looking in their favor.
Yeah.
Remember,
They took it off Facebook and everything
news
else.
story goes on, everyone gets a comment.
Yeah.
People fighting in the comments
Yeah.
and whatever. So it's not just a church problem.
No.
But there is a problem that maybe is a church problem, is the fact that not everything that the Pope or priests or the authority of the church say is up for debate. Like it's not a healthy way to approach the teachings of the church. It's not a healthy way to debate what Jesus intended or what the teachings of the church really mean. Yeah. And I see this also on my own personal social media channels, like people I follow. Yeah. People I follow are priests, and you got some big names like Bishop Robert Barron or Father Mike Schmitz. You got Catholic speakers like Paul J. Kim, and then you have like priests that I know or have met at conferences or things, and you just see the wide scope. You see, like the Pope says something, or there's some sort of article, depending on the time of year. We're in kind of close to the season of Lent, and someone will say something great about Lent that helps you reflect on your faith a little bit, and then someone like totally different. Even like I'm talking about like even priests,
Even within Catholic faith.
within the Catholic faith, will just say how terrible something is, and I'm talking
tear it apart.
I'm talking both extremes.
Yeah.
There's the extreme like you can't do anything, you can't move the wrong way, and you're going to be condemned. And then there's the other extreme where it's like you can do whatever you want and you'll still go to heaven. So it's just a shame that we approach faith like that. And I know that it is a thing for people to listen to, some people who listen to their favorite kind of speakers, right? You listen to podcasts, I listen to podcasts, we're on a podcast. And so people have their favorite, and that's fine. But when we're always listening to criticism about the church, because some podcasts are just criticism about the church, we also, that gets into our psyche. And so we're criticizing now. I guess what I'm trying to say, it's not good for our own faith development when we're doing that. And actually, the church has spoken about this, like way back, about how we are to understand, believe, and follow the teachings of the church.
Yeah, I think it's good to wrestle with the teachings of the church. I think
that's a different.
That's different. I think it is good to. You can disagree with them, but how you disagree with them, or how you go about finding the answers or finding resolution to your to the struggle of agreeing with a teaching or not, is different, right? And that's and the church kind of lays out kind of some ground rules on how you can go about doing that. First of all, I always think when I'm talking with the teens specifically. Whenever they're really struggling with something, I always say to them, well, whenever I'm struggling with something, I always think, okay, I'm only, I've got 40 years of wisdom behind this. The church has got 2,000, so like maybe I'm going to defer to the 2,000 before the 40. I can still, meaning that I'm going to take it on a very specific, like I got to go around, I got to struggle with it a little bit. I got to find one of the best things I ever heard in a debate going back and forth is if you really, before you can take a position on either side of a debate, let's say, is that you need to know both sides that you can argue so well that you can argue them. And if you know the opposite side, the thing that you struggle with, if you know that side so well that you can defend against your own arguments, that's when you're at the point now that you do have enough knowledge to kind of figure out where you stand. But until that point, if you're just listening to somebody else say, oh, well, they don't agree with it, and because I like that person on a podcast, then I don't agree with it. Or that person on the news. I see a lot of people that watch the news just all of a sudden like form opinions that I go, well, this is not based on any kind of truth. This is just based off some guy off the TV. You know what I mean? That's a struggle.
Yeah. I just want to say, like, I'm going to disagree with you on the topic of disagreement.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing to struggle with a teaching of the church.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't think the church expects people to vehemently disagree with its teaching.
You're right. You're right.
So it's one thing to say, like, why would the church teach that? And say, well, that is something I'm having difficulty understanding.
Yeah.
But for people to say, like, for example, I'm going to take a big topic here because, we always go to extremes. Like for people to say, no, women should be ordained priests. Yes. I disagree with the church's teaching. Well, that goes directly against what John Paul II has indicated, that this teaching is to be definitively held by all the faithful, right? So it's one thing to say, but that's very common, though.
Yeah.
Very common for people to say, like, no, I don't. I'm Catholic, but.
Yeah.
I'm Catholic, but.
Okay, I see that.
I'm trying to, make some change here, or just making it clear I'm Catholic, but I don't agree with. It's like the cool thing to say. I'm Catholic, but. So I will say that disagreeing is not okay. And why it's not okay is because this little document that from the Vatican from 1990, it was the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, now known as the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith. It was 1990. It was named Donum Veritatis, which means the gift of truth. And it was authored by Cardinal Ratzinger at the time, the future Pope Benedict XVI. Tell us a little bit about what that document is telling us, Matt.
Okay, so what the document sets out to do is to engage with theologians particularly, but really anyone who's interested in church teaching, anyone who's striving to be a faithful Catholic, how they engage with the magisterium of the church and how they receive, or what their attitude or disposition should be when they encounter, authoritative church teaching. So, first of all, it identifies that the magisterium of the church is the authoritative interpreter of divine revelation. So, the authoritative interpreter of sacred scripture and sacred tradition. So, that being kind of the starting off point, because you mentioned, a lot of times we're getting our information about what the church teaches through secondary sources, through commentary, through a YouTube channel, through whatever. And just being realistic about the kind of market realities of social media, and like a disagreeing view is probably going to get a lot more views than someone who's going through line by line, kind of explaining, why the church is teaching, how this fits in the deposit of the faith, deposit of faith. So the point is to recognize that the church has the legitimate authority to promulgate Catholic teaching. I was looking for a synonym for promulgate, but there isn't one. And to interpret, divine revelation in light of the current context. So, but it also has a lot of provisions for what happens if you encounter a teaching that you disagree with. What should your attitude be? Do you immediately, get onto whatever platform you have, and assert your disagreement, rally everyone to your cause and kind of democratize the church and, sway public opinion? No, you're supposed to receive the church's teaching with humility and docility. But because it's primarily addressed to theologians, there still may be some disagreement. There still may be some difficulty that needs to be worked through. So it gives some kind of provisions for, okay, how do you work through this? What do you do in the meantime? And what's the proper kind of recourse for these things?
Yeah, I find it kind of helpful because it is talking about theologians that they have the responsibility to research and study the things of theology and the things of the church, right? With the intention to maintain the deposit of faith and the unity of the church too. And that if they are if they are leaning towards this disagreement with the church, that they are to do it not in a scandalous way that sort of brings attention to them, right? And so it addresses the theologians who are studying sort of the church doctrine, and then it's addressing like people who are listening or learning about the church teaching as well. And I think that that's really important, is that, we're talking about people who disagree. I would say that that's true. Like, most people are learning faith and disagreeing with people because they're hearing it from people other than the authority of the church.
Yeah.
So, you'll often have like disagreements with an upset relative.
Agreed.
Who will say, I hate the church because of this or that or the other thing. And do you know that they teach this? Or do you know that this is what happens? And people are like, oh, really? And it's actually not the teaching of the church. There's that famous quote by Fulton Sheen, the Archbishop Fulton Sheen. There's not 100 people in the United States who hate the Catholic Church, but there are millions who hate what they perceive the Catholic Church 100%. To be.
Yeah, I think when we talk about disagreement, if you're talking about disagreement being on a journey, it's you're getting to the truth, and so your opinions don't match the Catholic Church's right now. But if you're on a journey to find the truth, that's okay. But if you're full stop, this is my opinion and I doesn't, you know what I mean? Then that's the problem. Because every time I've had a problem with the church, a teaching in the church, or I don't quite understand a teaching in the church, and so I'm going to say that I disagree with the teaching of the church at that point. I would go and look at it and dive down deep into the 2,000 years of knowledge and see why the church teaches things, and especially when like a lot of people, are all on the topics of things that really personally involve them, that they feel like they should have full control or say over. Topics like sex, topics like porn and masturbation, and the world says this, that, and the other thing. Topics like how to raise your family, or what you shouldn't divorce, or you shouldn't, all that kind of stuff. Like those really personal topics and mistakes that maybe people have made in the past per se, and possibly whether they knew or they didn't know or whatever the case may be. But if they're living in a way, then they have a disagreement. But it's not until they actually dive into it and see the full knowledge and wisdom of the church. And sometimes that means later on, it's going to take a couple of years to start to understand that wisdom. You know what I mean? Like, as a child, it doesn't understand why he can't touch the hot stove. But then eventually he touches the hot stove and then gets burned and goes, oh, okay, that's why Dad said no, that kind of thing. Yeah. The church has that same kind of don't do it. And not for them to be able to assert power over people or authority over people. That's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because we have 2,000 years of experience saying, this doesn't work. Go this way. You know?
And at the same time, we can recognize that people do have real struggles reconciling church teaching to their own lives or to their preconceived theology. So what actually prompted this discussion with us is a while ago we did our episode on the Winnipeg Statement and how, when Humanae Vitae came out, people had difficulty with this. At the time, the response, the point we made in the episode was that the response by the Canadian Conference of Bishops was not appropriate and had some kind of misguided ecclesiology. But this document, Dona Veritatis, has come out since. So again, people are accountable to this document for how they encounter disagreements with church teaching. And you can say over the past 15 years or so, and arguably before then as well, there have been documents that have come out that people have had kind of knee-jerk reactions to, or the commentary mill have really, really picked up on. So like even Amoris Laetitia. Again, there was a big kind of not a rejection, but you have a lot of pushback, a lot of resistance from to teaching that is issued appropriately through the magisterium of the church. Even in the last few years, you have things like Fiducia Supplicans and Traditionis Custodes, and even something like Dignitas Infinita. You have some pushback on what it has to say about the death penalty or what it has to say about these things. So people are having difficulty either reconciling their own perception of what the church should teach with what the church is actually teaching. So again, having these guidelines for, okay, what do you do when you have this difficulty? Is this difficulty an outright rejection that's not permitted under the document. That's public dissent, and that's actually a really grave matter. But do you you are permitted to privately withhold assent while you work through that difficulty in good faith. So again, there's that presupposes a proper understanding of what the church is relative to what I am. You know, like I'm even if I struggle with something, I'm not coming out and saying, okay, the church is wrong. This document is a disaster, or like, you know, the theology, like. I'm not, that's not in my scope. I'm not the arbiter of whether or not, you know, the church is teaching what it should teach, those types of things. I need to approach this, even if I'm struggling with it, with requisite humility and a willingness to admit that maybe I don't fully understand the situation, or I don't understand the all of the factors that go into why the church is teaching this.
We live in a world where we talk about my truth. You know, have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
People say, oh, well, my truth is this. Your truth might be different. But in saying that, no, truth is truth. There is truth. There is truth and there is not truth. And so the Catholic Church, given the authority through Christ, has the truth, or has truth. You know what I mean? And so that's what we can be searching for and everything else. Okay, one of my questions that I know that I'm going to ask, but I'm sure people are asking. So Pope gets on a plane, starts talking about puppies in heaven and all that other kind of fun stuff. And my interpretation is he's saying the dogs go to heaven. I don't agree with that, but you know, whatever. Is that something I have to believe? Like where is what do I have to agree with? What is magisterial teaching, and you know, how do I know as a regular Catholic where that line is?
Yeah, I think that's a fair starting point now that we're like halfway through the episode. But part of the problem is that a lot of people who are engaged in these types of conversations aren't taking the time to distinguish what is and is not magisterial. Yes. And I think if they did, you know, Catholic discourse in social media and kind of more broadly would be a better space, or would be much more productive. But yes, so if the Pope is in an interview on a plane, that's definitive. That's not definitive teaching from the office of the Pope. You still respect it because it's coming from the Holy Father, but you do take context into account. A good example is when we were talking about when he's talking to a bunch of youth about interreligious dialogue. Yes. He's framing things in a way that he wouldn't necessarily if he were giving a homily or doing something in a more a kind of official capacity. But if you want to know if something is magisterial, look to see whether or not it has been officially promulgated by a pope. So even the document that we're talking about, it was drafted by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict, was promulgated by Pope John Paul II. That forms part of his ordinary magisterium. So it's a magisterial document. It has the magisterial seal of authority. It requires the religious submission of intellect and will of the faithful. So just as kind of a guideline, if you are reading a document that's been published by the Vatican or published by a dicastery, if you kind of scroll down, most of the time it's at the bottom, sometimes it's at the top. Yeah. If the Pope orders its publication, or if the Pope orders the publication of a document, that is part of his ordinary magisterium, and it is considered magisterial. And this can be like any type of document. It can be a declaration. It can be a motu proprio. It can be even the Vatican II documents, the dogmatic constitutions. And it can be any kind of level of authoritative document. But if it has that kind of official promulgation, then it is magisterial.
So the difference, they have to have that.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, and right in canon law, it says that the faithful, a person must believe with divine and Catholic faith all the things contained in the Word of God, so Scripture, but also in things that are divinely revealed either by solemn magisterium of the Church or by its ordinary and universal magisterium, which is manifested by the common adherence of the Christian faithful under the leadership of the sacred magisterium. That's canon law 750. So each and everything which is proposed definitively by the magisterium of the Church concerning the doctrine of the faith and morals is to be firmly embraced and retained by the Catholic faithful. So I like what you said earlier about, withdrawing your assent quietly, because that's not how people deal with with their disagreements today,
Yeah.
right?
No.
And it's actually quite a holy way of trying to work through something. And it could be applied to many parts of our spiritual life as well. Just because we don't and there might be, most people don't even know every single thing the church teaches. So when you find something out that's against your own way of thinking, of course you're going to be like, oh, I don't know if I believe that. So it is a holy way of doing. Like, for example, even with dealing with a person, if you have a disagreement with a person, you don't have to, argue with them to death all the time or insult them or whatever it is.
Or post a YouTube video about how terrible they are as a person. Yeah.
Exactly, right? You just, remove your assent from the argument or whatever it is and try and work through something. So it's a very holy way of doing it. It's just not the way people are used to doing so today. Today, you have lots of people who post things online and maybe even talk about it with their family or friends. And it's kind of very popular to voice your dissent with the Catholic Church, even in Catholic circles,
You'll
there
get a
are
lot more views.
Yeah, sure. And there are like Catholic institutions that blatantly oppose the Catholic teachings, hospitals, schools, whatever you name it. There are Catholic faithful. Look at the studies. Studies show that only 70% of people don't believe in the Eucharist.
70% of Catholics.
70% of Catholics.
Yeah.
Look at like abortion, for example.
Yeah.
There's Catholics who think that abortion should be available.
Yeah.
There are Catholics right now who are participating in medical assistance in dying.
Yes.
So there's something wrong because when it comes down to it, it's like you were saying, like my truth, my feeling.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I feel bad for someone who's pregnant out of wedlock or something like that.
Yeah.
So they should be able to have an abortion. I feel bad that someone is suffering. They should have made.
Yeah.
I feel bad for someone who can't get married in the church. I feel like it comes down to feelings as well. If our first reaction would be to withdraw our assent in order to work through it in a with good intentions, with a holy intention, right, and come to understand it. I was trying to think of a personal example, but I know, like growing up a teenager, and your worldview is so different as a teenager and a young adult, especially in university. Universities are places that encourage such liberal thought today. And your thinking is kind of out there. And I was trying to think of a personal example, but I just remember, I can't think of a specific example, but I just remember having to myself work through some of these things and be like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense in light of my love of Jesus Christ. Like this isn't just a rule book. Like, when you start a new job and they hand you a manual, like here's the safety, here's the health and safety manual, here's how I don't know, here's what the union expects of you or whatever it might be. This is not what we hand people on the day of their baptism, right? Yeah. This is, as Catholics, we are people who love, believe in Jesus Christ, in a person. We don't believe in an idea. We don't believe in a feeling. We don't believe in lofty things. We believe in the person of Jesus Christ who died on the cross, rose from the dead, and is alive today. Like, that's different. Yeah. When you read these things and you understand the magisterium, the church's authority, teaching authority, in light of your friendship with Christ, that's such a different way of seeing these things. But then my problem is that there are still people who say things like, well, my Jesus would never do that, right?
Yeah.
And they'll use it. I was scandalized, like in the last couple of weeks, someone sent me a video from Instagram, and there's this Protestant pastor, and she is giving this sermon in her church promoting abortion.
What? Wow.
And saying actually that abortion is holy. And I'm just, it was like almost my stomach hurt.
Yeah.
Like, it's just such against anything that Jesus stands for. But that's another problem. It's like people are like, so you have the one layer of like, me, I don't like that. I don't feel that's right. That's not my truth. And then you have people with the audacity to say, my God would never
This, that, or the other.
this, that, or the other.
Yeah.
Crazy.
That's
And this is why we need the magisterium. This is what the role that the magisterium serves in the church, is that it helps to separate us from our own kind of subjective evaluation of things. So even like the section of canon law that you quoted, people might push back against this and quote something like Canon 212. So Canon 212 is the one that says, we have the individual kind of freedom of conscience to speak out against something that we don't believe to be true, and in some cases we have a moral obligation to to confront what we see to be as an untruth. So a lot of people who are kind of challenging the magisterium would say, okay, well, we're within kind of canon law. Thankfully, Donum Veritatis gives directs Canon 212. Yes, you do have that freedom of conscience. Yes, the submission of intellect and will isn't just kind of this tyrannical, okay, like I shut off your brain and just do what the church says. It's an act of faith to submit to something that you trust. So it says, okay, if you have issue with the proper avenue for this is the proper authority of the church. Write a letter to your bishop. Right. So again, you're not, you're not inciting mass dissent. You're actually saying, okay,
you go one-on-one.
My subjective evaluation of this situation is different from what the church is teaching me. The church is there to help you work through that issue. It's also noteworthy that because this was published in 1990. This is before social media even existed.
Right.
There's a quotation in Dona Veritatis that said the theologian should avoid turning to mass media. And trying to stir
like air grievances,
yes,
sort of thing.
and sway public opinion
Yes.
in a certain direction against the church or against the church's. Let's see how many people we can get angry about this, and then maybe something will change. That's the wrong attitude. It also advises against. I think the exact term is avoid setting up a parallel magisterium, so competing forces within the church. This cardinal doesn't agree with this document or whatever, and I follow them, you follow. And it's really a lot like St. Paul saying, I follow Apollos, I follow. We follow Jesus Christ.
That's right.
That is our mission as the church, and we've been given the gift of truth. We've been given the magisterium to guide and direct. That understanding of faith.
On this, like, part of my problem with some of the speakers who try and divide, this cardinal doesn't believe this cardinal, whatever. There are a lot of commentators out there right now that are popular who have like a very far right leaning sort of approach to the church's teaching, and they'll criticize anything the Pope does, or they criticize whatever it might be, and they have commentary sort of saying, this bishop actually thinks this or whatever, and it's a heavy, I would say, uncharitable criticism of the Holy Father or the church in general. And if people are listening today, and that's something that you do, like you're listening to a certain podcast or host or whatever it might be, commentator, that is always in the negative, that is always like stirring up the pot.
Yeah.
It's just not good for our spiritual life. And I just want to caution people that the church is our mother. The church is our mother. And our mother, it's a place where we come to be nestled by our mother. It's our home. It's the bride of Christ. We would never, imagine if you listen to a podcast every day or a commentator every day that spoke ill of your spouse.
Yeah.
Or your mother.
Yep.
Or your father, or whoever, your children. If you listen to that every single day, someone talking negatively about your spouse or whoever it is, you would not look at your spouse in the same way, because your mind is being filled. And almost anything that you hear about the church after, like with that mindset, immediately negative.
Yeah.
Immediately, it's not healthy. it's not healthy to be wrapped up in those like heavy, like fiery, brimstone-y preachers, commentators, whatever it might be. It's not healthy, and I think that's part of the problem. Right?
I think I was listening to I was listening to a guy that was talking about this, and I really liked what he said. He said if you disagree with like if you disagree, let's say with something that Pope Francis or your bishop said, use St. Paul, test everything, hold fast to what is true. But we often say test everything, hold fast to what is true, not test one thing and then never believe that guy again. There is a possibility that your priest or your bishop might say something that doesn't quite sit well with you, that you don't quite agree with. When you go searching for truth and stuff like that, you might misunderstand what they've said, or you might, it doesn't quite hold the water, let's say. Okay. And so you go, okay, well, I'm just writing this guy off altogether. Well, that's not what we're saying here. Like if Pope Francis says something on a school bus, or says something on an airplane, or says something that doesn't hold fast or hold what you perceive to be the truth, test that thing. Go into it, give him the benefit, the respect and humility. Go into the argument with respect and humility to see what could he be meaning, what could he have meant by this, and give him the benefit of the doubt. And that's not just Pope Francis; that's every cardinal and the bishops and priests and stuff around. What could they have meant by this? And then after that, if you still don't agree, you can approach them and the Bible gives us also this, approach them one-on-one. If you have a disagreement with a brother, approach them one-on-one, and then figure that out first. Yeah. But then test the next thing. Don't just say, okay, what they're going to say is false now. You know what I mean? Test the next thing, test the next thing, test the next thing. You're going to find in the magisterium of the church itself, every time I've done this, every time I've gone I don't know if I quite agree with this, or I don't quite understand the Assumption of Mary. I don't quite understand the Mary full of grace. I'm using Mary just because it's an easier one it doesn't have the Bible teaching, and Protestants often have a struggle with that. But then when I go into it, I say, okay, why does the church, for me, why does the church say this is doctrine? Dogma that Mary is the Immaculate Conception is dogma. That was a big thing for me. I remember kind of going I don't quite, because dogma is from the Word of God. Where did God say that Mary doesn't have sin when she was conceived? And and then I realized after I got I had to go deep into church teaching, going, oh wow. Mary, full of grace, filled with grace, that the angel was actually declaring her sinless at that time, depending on the wording, the Greek translation of the word, and just going, wow, oh, the angel of the Lord, this is in the Bible, and this is something from way back when. We believe this. Yeah, this Mary was born without sin, still saved through God and whatever, but you know what I mean? Taking that concept and struggling with it a little bit, and then diving in and going, oh, the church is right. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. For me, again, struggling with it, not quite understanding, but diving in deep. I like what one guy said, respectfully, search in respect and humility for the answer, and then do it patiently. Meaning you're not going to find the answer today necessarily. You might, but you might not. So it might take a little bit of time to struggle with it and get through it, but and then eventually get there.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back to what you're saying about kind of protecting your perspective. Just if you are if the sources for kind of Catholic teaching and Catholic commentary that you're going for are just are feeding a kind of negativity. We don't want to say you should just only go for positive. You want to have serious discussions about faith, and in order to do that, you need to be able to have. You need to be able to communicate, why there would be kind of disagreement. But there's a very kind of fine line of where that can become not only a problem for your perspective, but also kind of gravely sinful. That it's okay, so if what you're listening, and again, our goal here isn't to just kind of name names or call out, don't watch this YouTube channel or listen to this podcast, but it's be on your guard against what's informing your perspective, but also making sure you're not mimicking this behavior. So if you're listening to something that is actively trying to undermine confidence in the church, the authority of the church or whatever else, that's a grave matter. And it's if you are listening to or getting some gratification out of reputation destruction, or if you are someone is actively slandering the church, or even if somebody is saying something that's true that is trying to, again, undermine the faithful's confidence in the church and the role that the church has. Again, that's not good for your perspective if that's the kind of commentary that you're seeking out. But if it's something that you're mimicking in your own practice of faith, that can be a grave matter for you.
Exactly. I don't think that I want people to walk away today thinking that they can't discuss church teaching or wrestle with it, right? But this idea of, what the church says we don't have to follow, that's not true. That's not true. We did an episode a couple of years ago, I think, if it was called... I don't know, something. I forgot the episode name, but it was about like if you're not a practicing, are you still a Catholic in good standing? That sort of. And if you don't believe what the church teaches, and people will always say, well, you're baptized, so you're still in.
You're good to go.
You're
going
to
to
go.
heaven.
But no, there's more to it than that. The church has 5 precepts that every Catholic has to follow. The canon law says that we have to adhere and firmly embrace and retain the teachings of the church, and we have to live them out. I think I do think that there's a beautiful group of Catholics in large numbers that truly embrace firmly the teachings of the church. And I just want to encourage them to be bold about it. If you love your church, share it. Because right now, I think what's happening is the people who don't follow the teachings of the church and still call themselves Catholic, they are sharing more so than we are.
Yep.
Why you shouldn't believe what the church teaches, right? And almost like a disdain for the authority of the church. So I think there's a beautiful group of people who love the church and love the church's teachings. And remember, all the church's teachings are supposed to help us to grow in holiness and to help us flourish in life, in our spiritual life. They make us better people because they help us to be conformed to the person of Jesus. And that's the whole point.
Yeah.
We're to be conformed to the person of Jesus Christ. And that's what the church's teachings help us to do. Sorry if, some people don't like some of the teachings that help us conform to Jesus, but, we should pray for them. We should pray for the people who don't understand. We should pray for the people who are just misguided, and we should pray for a conversion of heart for them. But more importantly, I think the people who love the church, embrace the church's teachings, and find fulfillment in them should band together and share that with others, not to be ashamed that we are Catholic and we love the church and her teachings, and we find great joy in our life by living the church teachings. I think it's really important to share that, and not always just let people who don't like the church's teaching have the last word.
Yeah.
If you want the last word, you can drop us a line at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com, or you can comment right on our social media pages or our YouTube channel as well. That's all the time we have today. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milgen, my name is Father Dignali. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.